I'm going to make a bold move here and propose a pipeline between two isms that on first blush you would have said, what are you smoking? There can't be a pipeline between these two. Like, of all isms, it can't be between these two isms. But I'm saying, indeed there is. I've never seen anyone propose this. That's why I'm calling it a bold move, but it's quite undeniable the more I think about it. And I'm going to present it as premise, conclusion. The way so many people online, they start LARPing as logicians, and so they do premise, conclusion. So I'm going to kind of LARP as a logician for once, even though I know full well that I'm not. But yeah, this recently dawned on me. It's undeniable the more I think about it, but it's just amazing. I've never seen people say that there's a through line between two isms that, well, I brought one of them up quite recently and quite often in recent uploads, and that is Stoicism, and I'll tell you about the other one later. So, the first premise, Stoicism as a philosophy of living, practical philosophy. What does Stoicism want us to do? What is the kind of core truth of Stoicism? And that is that there shouldn't be stuff that bothers us in life. They want us to reach that, not just equanimity, but as Shaw put it in the chapter, Stoicism is about achieving that irrefragable equanimity and that unclouded state of contentness. So to sum it up is, you can say Stoicism wants us to not lean into the cares and troubles of life. Premise 2, parents, to the extent that I've observed them as a kid and then especially as an adult. You can suss this out through statistics as well, but more so in my experience, just observing parents as a person who's known his fair share of parents. Parents are these worriers, not warriors, worriers. They worry a lot, and rightly so. I mean, just think about it. Put yourself in the position of a couple who's just like the Amber Alert that goes out. It goes out because their child is missing. You're not going to have anything like that irrefragable equanimity, and it might even be said that you'd be a monster if you did. No, your child is a child for which there is an Amber Alert. No. So we can say that by choosing to start a family, not just having it happen because the pregnancy is unintended, no, but choosing to start a family. To do so is really to lean in to the cares and troubles of life in a way that it's never going to be something that you can fully escape, whether you're a parent or not, whether you have a family or not. Nonetheless, you're going to be that much closer to being aloof often enough if you go familial-less. With parents, it's not just that it's going to be harder to do just emotionally, but one might even say a parent who remains aloof once their child goes missing, that's a monstrous parent. And so those are the two premises. Premise 1, Stoicism says, don't lean into the cares and troubles of life. The decision to start a family is just, if I'm going to sum it up as anything, it is that kind of willingness to lean into that. And so think in terms of the conclusion, well, the writing's on the wall at this point. There is a pipeline between anti-natalism and Stoicism. If you look steadily enough, there's a pipeline between anti-natalism and Stoicism. By no means is it clear based on everything I've said so far. I've given these kind of, maybe people will want to pick these two premises apart. Maybe it's shoddy to them. By all means, take it up with me in the comment section. But before you do, I read out the chapter that I kept saying I'm going to read out. And so having read that out, this is precisely what's going to follow. So if this just seems shoddy to you, these two isms that no one is compared, and if anything, I think on first blush, people might have the intuition that actually there's something inherently pro-worry in anti-natalism. I beg to differ. But before I get to all that, let's just proceed with the section where I'm doing the intro to the video, and I'm saying the very first thing in the video is going to have to be me reading out this chapter. And as I'm reading out the chapter, I want this additional lens on it, and that is everything that he's saying. He's talking about both the Cynics and the Stoics. Pay specific attention when he's referring to that equanimity. And all the fools who pass from rejoicing to mourning and from hoping to fearing, these are follies that if you at least do everything you can to not lean into the cares and troubles of life. They will always haunt you, but then it's possible to, on top of them haunting you, to lean into it that much more by having a family. Stoicism is a recipe very much against that, and thus Stoicism is a step toward thinking like an anti-natalist. So right away, this is going to be a reading section to kick things off. I've said so much in the video that's going to have to be preserved for later on. All throughout the audios, I reference how I need to read this chapter. I need to read this chapter. So let's just go ahead and read the damn chapter now so that everyone has a clear idea what I'm referring to exactly in all those instances where I say it needs to be read out. I mean, I steamroll through some of these in my explanations, especially when I'm out and about. I kind of steamroll through what exactly is meant, and I don't think I do the topic much good when that happens. So it's reading time. This is on the practical use of reason and on Stoicism, or on the use of practical reason, one of those two. I may have flubbed it previously. I may have misplaced the word practical within the title. But anyway, the reason I'm so obsessed with this, and the reason my mouth essentially salivates when I read on the lifestyle of the Cynics in particular, with some exceptions, you know, it's a lifestyle I would want to commit to an extent, excluding the hygiene stuff, the turning away of the soap. I mean, that aside, my mouth essentially waters, allegorically, essentially waters when I read this, as you would have probably caught on by now. But the best way to sum it up, and here I have the Stoics in mind when it comes to summing up some of the issues, and really the shortcomings of Stoicism. The best way to sum all of that up is there is no gray area between desiring and renouncing. That's something I haven't said at all when I was doing my own tangents on this stuff, but the best thing to say is there's no gray zone, there's no gray area between desiring and renouncing. It's explained really well here in this chapter, and as a strike against Stoicism. Now, maybe I've just not read enough critiques of Stoicism such that this would seem banal to someone else, but it doesn't seem to me. I really doubt it. No, this is top shelf stuff, because one of the foundational claims of Stoicism is that yes, you can wiggle your way to a middle path between desire and undesire, such that you can be unmoved in the face of when shit hits the fan, right? Stoicism has a lot going for it, but in the end, it's more charade than anything. It's not all charade, but it goes some way to being charade when it's billed as an approach to living the good life. Because it aims to convince any rational agent that yes, there is this gray zone, and if you're reasonable, you'll find a way to tap dance around desiring and renouncing. But no, because you got to put yourself to the test. You got to put yourself to the test to see if you will actually miss all those things that you claim. If you're a Stoic, you self-identify as a Stoic, all those things you claim that you won't miss should they pass from your life. You know, because you found this workaround to all that frailty, essentially. It's very simple. The Cynics put themselves to the test. The Stoics didn't. The Cynics were more hands-on and earnest in that carving yourself to be the kind of person who won't miss things, and the Stoics didn't. So I go on about all that in the non-reading sections. This will be a reading section because I'm going to read out this chapter. At least I'm going to read out what's legible to me. It's not an easy task to get all that translated in English, certainly in this older translation. The translation that's older is still better in every other respect, but not in there's certain passages that are not translated properly. So regardless, I'm reading enough of this chapter and hopefully conserving as much time as possible because I've got other rants to include afterward. Oh wow, so I actually didn't flub it now that I have the text in front of me. I see I got it right the first time. It takes a while before he actually gets to the two isms that are the main isms of this chapter. He mentions it in the title, and then it's just the text for a bit. So just be patient. Everything he says at the very outset of the chapter does matter, but it takes a bit getting used to what he's talking about here. So he starts, in the 7th chapter, I have shown that in the theoretical sphere, procedure based upon conceptions suffices for mediocre achievements only, while great achievements, on the other hand, demand that we should draw from perception itself as the primary source of all knowledge. In the practical sphere, however, the converse is the case. Here, determination by what is perceived is the way of the brutes, but is unworthy of man, who has conceptions to guide his conduct, and is thus emancipated from the power of what is actually perceptibly present, to which the brute is unconditionally given over. In proportion as a man makes good of this prerogative, his conduct may be called rational, and only in this sense can we speak of practical reason, not in the Kantian sense, the inadmissibility of which I have thoroughly exposed in my prize essay on the foundation of morals. It is not easy, however, to let oneself be determined by conceptions alone, for the directly present external world, with its perceptible reality, intrudes itself forcibly even on the strongest mind. But it is just in conquering this impression, in destroying its illusion, that the human spirit shows its worth and greatness. So for someone who gets referred to as an absolute pessimist, wrongly, mind you, there's enough evidence when it comes to these kinds of remarks he's made that are sprinkled all throughout this book, using words like greatness in reference to the human spirit. It is specifically in these ways that you can actually disprove anyone who claims that anyone who presents Schopenhauer as an absolute pessimist. He wasn't an absolute pessimist. He just thought the bad prevailed over the good, as is the best way to summarize pessimism proper. I shouldn't depart from the text because God, this is 14 pages, this chapter. So yeah, it's gonna take me a while. So I need to stick to the text. Thus, if incitements to lust and pleasure leave it unaffected, if the threats and fury of enraged enemies do not shake it, if the entreaties of erring friends do not make its purpose waver, and if the delusive forms with which preconceived plots surround it leave it unmoved, if the scorn of fools and of the vulgar herd does not disturb it nor trouble it as to its own worth, then it seems to stand under the influence of a spirit world visible to it alone, and this is the world of conceptions, before which that perceptibly present world which lies open to all dissolves like a phantom. But, on the other hand, what gives to the external world and visible reality their great power over the mind is their nearness and directness. As the magnetic needle, which is kept in its position by the combined action of widely distributed forces of nature embracing the whole earth, can yet be perturbed and set in violent oscillation by a small piece of iron, if only it comes quite close to it, so even a great mind can sometimes be disconcerted and perturbed by trifling events and insignificant men, if only they affect it very closely, and the deliberate purpose can be for the moment shaken by a trivial but immediately present counter-motive. For the influence of the motives is subject to a law which is directly opposed to the law according to which weights act on a balance, and in consequence of it, a very small motive which, however, lies very near to us, can outweigh one which in itself is much stronger, but which only affects us from a distance. But it is this quality of the mind, by reason of which it allows itself to be determined in accordance with this law, and does not withdraw itself from it by the strength of actual practical reason, which the ancients denoted by animi impotentia, which really signifies ratio regendi voluntatis impotens. I'm going to have to figure out what I'm going to do about these passages and the foreign terms which are just sprinkled all throughout this chapter. I'll figure that out, but for the time being I'm just pronouncing them as I'm reading them, which means butchering them. Every emotion, animi perturbatio, simply arises from the fact that an idea which affects our will comes so excessively near to us that it conceals everything else from us, and we can no longer see anything but it, so that for the moment we become incapable of taking into account things of another kind. It would be a valuable safeguard against this if we were to bring ourselves to regard the present by the assistance of imagination as if it were the past, and should thus accustom our apperception to the epistolary style of the Romans. The epistolary style of the Romans. It's just so amazing that I intuited my way to this in my, fake record, fake art thing that I do. I've got hundreds of these fake records, and it's rare that I use the word is instead of was. If I'm describing something, especially describing something bad, it's always presented in past tense, such that there's a lingering fatalism to it, and I think that adds an aesthetic to it. Like, if something really bad is presented and discussed and broached in these fake records that I do, it's always portrayed as having already come to pass, such that there's nothing that we can do to undo it or to stop it. It was bad, and it transpired. And then I come to read this chapter, well, reread it after having abandoned this book for way too many years. And I learned stuff like this, that, yeah, absolutely. The Romans accustomed their apperception in the same way. Yet conversely, we are very well able to regard what is long past as so vividly present that old emotions which have long been asleep are thereby reawakened in their full strength. Thus, also no one would be irritated or disconcerted by a misfortune, a disappointment, if reason always kept present to him what man really is, the most needy of creatures, daily and hourly abandoned to innumerable misfortunes, great and small, foreign, who has therefore to live in constant care and fear. Herodotus already says, homo totus es calamitas. The application of reason to practice primarily accomplishes this. It reconstructs what is one-sided and defective in knowledge of mere perception and makes use of the contrasts or oppositions which it presents to correct each other, so that thus the objectively true result is arrived at. For example, if we look simply at the bad action of a man, we will condemn him. On the other hand, if we consider merely the need that moved him to it, we will compassionate him. Reason, by means of its conceptions, weighs the two and leads to the conclusion that he must be restrained, restricted, and curbed by a proportionate punishment. I am again reminded here of Seneca's saying, foreign ends with the word ratione. I'll take care of it post-production. Since, however, as was shown in the fourth book, the nature of suffering is positive and that of pleasure is negative, he who takes abstract or rational knowledge as the rule of his conduct and therefore constantly reflects on its consequences and on the future will very frequently have to practice sutin et abstin. For in order to obtain the life that is most free from pain, he generally sacrifices its keenest joys and pleasures, mindful of Aristotle's. Therefore, with him, the future constantly borrows from the present, instead of the present borrowing from the future, as is the case with the frivolous fool, who thus becomes impoverished and finally bankrupt. In the case of the former, reason must, for the most part, assume the role of a churlish mentor, and unceasingly call for renunciations without being able to promise anything in return except a fairly painless existence. This rests on the fact that reason, by means of its conceptions, surveys the whole of life, whose outcome in the happiest conceivable case can be no other than what we have said. When this striving after a painless existence, so far as it might be attainable by the application of and strict adherence to rational reflection, and acquired knowledge of the true nature of life, was carried out with the greatest consistency and to the utmost extreme, it produced cynicism, from which Stoicism afterwards proceeded. I wish briefly here to bring this out more fully and for the sake of establishing more firmly the concluding exposition of our first book. All ancient moral systems, with the single exception of that of Plato, were guides to a happy life. Accordingly, in them, the end of virtue was entirely in this life, not beyond death. For to them it is only the right path to a truly happy life, and on this account the wise choose it. Hence arise those lengthy debates chiefly preserved for us by Cicero, those keen and constantly renewed investigations, whether virtue quite alone and in itself is really sufficient for a happy life. I mean, this is the total meme, and as he shows himself, but he kind of presents it in a competitive manner. Whether this question is something that is even competitive with the truth, but he knows it's not. Whether virtue quite alone and in itself is really sufficient for a happy life, or whether this further requires some external condition, whether the virtuous and the wise may also be happy on the rack and the wheel, or in the bull of Phalaris, or whether it does not go as far as this. For certainly this would be the touchstone of an ethical system of this kind. The practice of it must give happiness directly and unconditionally. If it cannot do this, it does not accomplish what it ought. Certainly I would say here what it self-presents as being able to deliver. It does not accomplish what it ought and must be rejected. It is therefore with truth and in accordance with the Christian point of view that Augustine prefaces his exposition of the moral systems of the ancients with the explanation. Okay, so here's a long passage. I will figure out what to do with that later, but I ain't pronouncing this long foreign passage. Passage ends, and then he continues. I wish to place beyond all doubt the eudaimonistic end, which we have ascribed to all ancient ethics by several express statements of the ancients themselves. Aristotle says in foreign, quite a bit of foreign stuff here. God, the whole page is foreign passages. The ethics of the Cynics also adopted this end of the happiest life, as the Emperor Julian expressly testifies. Only the Cynics followed quite a peculiar path to this end, a path directly opposed to the ordinary one, the path of extreme privation. They start from the insight that the motions of the will, which are brought about by the objects which attract and excited, and the wearisome and for the most part vain efforts to attain these, or if they are attained, the fear of losing them, and finally the loss itself, produce far greater pain than the want of all these objects ever can. Therefore, in order to attain the life that is most free from pain, they chose the path of the extremest destitution and fled from all pleasures as snares through which one was afterwards handed over to pain. Handed over. In the previous video I said given over. It's handed over to pain. But after this, they could boldly scorn, I said justly scorn, but the text says, after this they could boldly scorn happiness and its caprices. This is the spirit of cynicism. Seneca distinctly expresses it in the 8th chapter. A lot of foreign passages here. Accordingly, the fundamental thought of cynicism is that life in its simplest and nakedest form, with the hardships that belong to it by nature, is the most endurable and is therefore to be chosen. For every assistance, convenience, gratification, and pleasure, by means of which men seek to make life more agreeable, only brings with it new and greater ills than originally belonged to it. Therefore, we may regard the following sentence as the expression of the kernel of the doctrine of cynicism. Foreign? God, so much foreign. Therefore, the old genuine cynics, Antisthenes, Diogenes, Crates, and their disciples had once and for all renounced every possession, all conveniences and pleasures in order to escape forever from the troubles and cares and the dependence and the pains which are inevitably bound up with them and are not counterbalanced by them. Through the bare satisfaction of the most pressing wants and the renunciation of everything superfluous, they thought they would come off best. Accordingly, they contented themselves with what in Athens or Corinth was to be had almost for nothing, such as lupines, water, an old threadbare cloak, a wallet, and a staff. They begged occasionally as far as was necessary to supply such wants, but they never worked. Yet they accepted absolutely nothing that exceeded the wants referred to above. See, in the past video I made it seem like as if it was all for settling, but it wasn't a mere matter of settling. It was that they wouldn't accept anything that surpassed these as here described. Independence, in the widest sense, was their aim. They occupied their time in resting, going about, talking with all men, and much mocking, laughing, and joking. Their characteristic was carelessness and great cheerfulness. Since now in this matter of life they had no aims of their own, no purposes or ends to pursue, thus were lifted above the sphere of human action, and at the same time always enjoyed complete leisure, they were admirably fitted as men of proved strength of mind to be the advisors and admonishers of the rest. Just polar opposite of the Petersonian mindset that you have to do in order to know. But more on that in separate videos. Therefore, Apuleius says, and then a bunch of foreign stuff. Thus, in this, as in so many other respects, they show a great likeness to the mendicant friars of modern times, that is, to the better and more genuine among them, whose ideal may be seen in the Capuchin Cristoforo of the Manzoni's famous romance. Yet this resemblance lies only in the effects, not in the cause. They agree in the result, but the fundamental thought of the two is quite different. With the friars, as with the sannyasis, who are akin to them, it is an aim which transcends life, but with the cynics it is only the conviction that it is easier to reduce their wishes and their wants to the minimum than to attain to the maximum in their satisfaction, which indeed is impossible, for with their satisfaction the wishes and wants grow ad infinitum. Therefore, in order to reach the goal of all ancient ethics, the greatest happiness possible in this life, they took the path of renunciation as the shortest and the easiest. Foreign. The fundamental difference between the spirit of cynicism and that of asceticism comes out very clearly in the humility which is essential to the ascetic, but is so foreign to the cynic that, on the contrary, he is distinguished beyond everything for pride and scorn. See how much better it is written in this one than in the one I flashed in the previous video? The latter-day translation, they didn't use pride and scorn, they used some other term, a weaker term. Then there's a foreign quote. On the other hand, the view of life held by the cynics agrees in spirit with that of J.J. Rousseau as he expounds it in the foreign title, Discourse the Original. Yeah, I'm not going to try this. For he also would wish to lead us back to the crude state of nature and regards the reduction of our wants to the minimum as the surest path to happiness. For the rest, the cynics were exclusively practical philosophers. At least no account of their theoretical philosophy is known to me. Now the Stoics proceeded from them in this way. They changed the practical into the theoretical. They held that the actual dispensing with everything that can be done without is not demanded, but that it is sufficient that we should regard possessions and pleasures constantly as dispensable and as held in the hand of chance. For then the actual deprivation of them, if it should chance to occur, would neither be unexpected nor fall heavily. One might always have and enjoy everything, only one must ever keep present the conviction of the worthlessness and dispensableness of all these good things on the one hand, and of their uncertainty and perishableness on the other, and therefore prize them all very little, and be always ready to give them up. Nay, more, he who must actually dispense with these things in order to not be moved by them, thereby shows that in his heart he holds them to be truly good things, which one must put quite out of sight if one is to not long after them. The wise man, on the other hand, knows that they are not good things at all, but rather perfectly indifferent things. Foreign, I think it's pronounced... no, I can't do this foreign. In any case, another foreign thing. Therefore, if they present themselves, he will accept them, but yet is always ready to let them go again, if chance to which they belong should demand them back. For they are foreign, ton fu ephemine. In this sense, Epictetus, chapter 7, says that the wise man, like the one who has landed from a ship, etc., will also let himself be comforted by a wife or a child, but yet will always be ready, whenever the captain calls, to let them go again. Thus the Stoics perfected the theory of equanimity and independence at the cost of the practice, for they reduced everything to a mental process, and by arguments, such as are presented in the first chapter of Epictetus, sophisticated themselves to all the amenities of life. But in doing so, they left out of account that everything to which one is accustomed becomes a need, and therefore can only be given up with pain, that the will does not allow itself to be played with, cannot enjoy without loving the pleasures, that a dog does not remain indifferent if one draws a piece of meat through its mouth, and neither does a wise man if he is hungry, and that there's no middle path between desiring and renouncing. But they believe that they satisfied their principles if, sitting at a luxurious Roman table, they left no dish untasted, yet at the same time protested that they were each and all of them mere proigmena, not agatha, or in plain English, if they eat, drank, and were merry, yet gave no thanks to God for it all, but rather made fastidious faces, and persisted in boldly asserting that they gained nothing whatever from the whole feast. This was the expedient of the Stoics. They were therefore mere braggarts, and stand to the Cynics in much the same relation as well-fed Benedictines and Augustines stand to Franciscans and Capuchins. Now, the more they neglected the practice, the more they refined the theory. I shall here add a few proofs and supplementary details to the exposition of it given at the close of our first book. If we search in the writings of the Stoics, which remain to us, all of which are unsystematically composed, for the ultimate ground of that irrefragable equanimity which is unceasingly demanded of us, we find no other than the knowledge that the course of the world is entirely independent of our will, and consequently that the evil which befalls us is inevitable. If we have regulated our claims by a correct insight into this, then mourning, rejoicing, fearing, and hoping are follies of which we are no longer capable. Here, He should have written no longer said to be capable, just to make it clear that it's not his view. Mourning, rejoicing, fearing, and hoping are follies of which we are no longer capable. Further, especially in the commentaries of Arian, it is surreptitiously assumed that all that is foreign, but then also translated into i.e. does not depend upon us, is at once also foreign, but then also translated does not concern us. Yet it remains true that all the good things of life are in the power of chance, and therefore, whenever it makes use of this power to deprive us of them, we are unhappy if we have placed our happiness in them. From this unworthy fate we are, in the opinion of the Stoics, delivered by the right use of reason, by virtue of which we regard all these things never as ours, but only as lent to us for an indefinite time. Only thus can we never really lose them. Therefore Seneca says, 98, foreign, and Diogenes Laertius, also a bunch of foreign stuff here. And the more I go down, the more I see that this latter section of the chapter is just dominated by lengthy passages. I have the other translation which does translate them into English, and so if I want to really stretch out this reading task, I can, go to that translation and then incorporate all the English. I don't know if I'll do that though, because it's just going to make this way too time consuming for me. Because he gets into some passages from Marcus Aurelius. That is, if he is a stranger to the universe who does not know what is in it, no less is he a stranger who does not know how things go on in it. Also, Seneca's 11th chapter is a complete proof of this view. The opinion of the Stoics amounts on the whole to this, that if a man has watched for a while the juggling illusion of happiness, and then uses his reason, he must recognize both the rapid changes of the dice and the intrinsic worthlessness of the counters, and therefore must henceforth remain unmoved. Taken generally, the Stoical point of view may be thus expressed. Our suffering always arises from the want of agreement between our wishes and the course of the world. Therefore, one of these two must be changed and adapted to the other. Since now the course of things is not in our power, foreign, we must direct our volitions and desires according to the course of things, for the will alone is foreign. This adaptation of volition to the course of the external world, thus to the nature of things, is very often understood under the ambiguous foreign see discourses of Epictetus. Seneca also denotes this point of view, 119, when he says, lengthy foreign passage, and the more we go, the more, like I said, the more this gets dominated on by these things that I can translate and that I might translate, but Jesus, it's going to take me quite a long time, and I don't know if I value the viewer's experience enough to bother doing that, because whatever good may arise from it may very well perish easily because it belongs to chance, does it not? Okay, now I'm just being a smartass to rationalize my laziness. The collected quotations in the Historica Philosophiae Graecio romance of Ritter and Preller may be taken as proof of what I have said in the place referred to above about the foreign of the Stoics. Also the saying of Seneca, 31 and especially 34. I'm just going to skip these and just read the parts in English. A systematical study of the Stoics will convince everyone that the end of their ethics, like the end of the ethics of Cynicism from which they sprang, is really nothing else than a life as free as possible from pain and therefore as happy as possible. Whence it follows that the Stoical morality is only a special form of eudaimonism. And now my understanding of eudaimonic ethics may very well be different from Schopenhauer's. Eudaimonia is subsumed within hedonism. It's not apart from it. It's not some separate branch. It is a branch of hedonism, which is, how did I hear a podcaster summarize it? I really liked a summary that a podcaster gave it. I think Julia Galef once gave it a quick definition. Eudaimonia is just happiness minus all the common critiques of happiness used to dismiss happiness. That was her a brief summary of eudaimonia, and so I don't know if Schopenhauer has the same view or if he thinks eudaimonia is entirely separate from certainly crude hedonism. The Stoical morality is only a special form of eudaimonism. It has not, like the Indian, the Christian, and even the Platonic ethics, a metaphysical tendency, a transcendental end, but a completely immanent end, attainable in this life, the steadfast serenity and unclouded happiness of the wise men, whom nothing can disturb. Yet it cannot be denied that the latter Stoics, especially Arian, sometimes lose sight of this end and show a really ascetic tendency, which is also attributed to the Christian and Oriental spirit in general, which was then already spreading. If we consider closely and seriously the goal of Stoicism, that arakita, we find in it merely a hardening and an insensibility to the blow of fate which a man attains because he keeps ever present to his mind the shortness of life, the emptiness of pleasure, and the insatiability of happiness, and has also discerned that the difference between happiness and unhappiness is very much less than our anticipation of both is one to represent. But it is yet no state of happiness. It is only the patient endurance of sufferings which one has foreseen as irredeemable. Yet magnanimity and worth consist in this, that one should bear silently and patiently what is irredeemable in melancholy peace, remaining always the same, while others pass from rejoicing to despair and from despair to rejoicing. Accordingly, one may also conceive of Stoicism as a spiritual hygiene, in accordance with which, just as one hardens the body against the influences of wind and weather, against fatigue and exertion, one has also to harden one's mind against the misfortune, danger, loss, injustice, malice, perfidy, arrogance, and the folly of men. I remark further that the foreign word of the Stoics, which Cicero translates officia, signify as nearly as possible foreign word, or that which it befits the occasion to do. Okay, and then just a bunch more passages, and that will be the end. Apologies in advance if I choose not to cover my basis and even refuse to flash the English translations on the screen. Ideally, I should go to the other translation and just read those English translations, but then if I were to do that, I would have to make so many dubs into the audio that it would take me forever to finish that. But maybe I'll just flash them on the screen, the written versions of it. I don't know. Nonetheless, now that I'm done reading, I have all those other things to get to. Well, this is one of the most frustrating things I recall ever enduring, just in terms of prep for the video. I read out this chapter ages ago, and I finally decided to go back to the folder where it is, and let's actually upload this as the video that it needs to be. But I know that throughout the whole readout, I kept saying, this is foreign, that's foreign, I'll have to take care of this post-production. And so that's what I'm trying to do right now, but holy hell, these two, they might as well be different chapters. Between the latter-day translation and the older one, whose prose I like, the older one doesn't contain that English stuff. That's why I had to say foreign a bunch of times throughout the readout. But I want to kind of line them up. But it's as if they're different chapters. There's scant familiarities. Like, okay, I see this is the same part. But then, before you know it, it lapses into a completely different thing. The latter-day translation is 9 pages. The former one is 14, I think I said. So this is kind of more... the latter one just it's thinner. And so I can't even just grab these and just flash the text on the screen, because I'm not sure what the hell it is in terms of it actually corresponding to the chapter I read out. So my apologies, but the foreign stuff is going to have to just stay foreign. I tried. I really did. I tried to accommodate the viewer's experience. I really did try. But the chapters are too dissimilar. It's as if these people are translating a different book. I've never experienced something like this in my whole life, where a mere different translation just renders it as if it's an entirely different book, certainly with the Stoicism chapter. So, if you folk want those things translated into English, you're going to have to hit someone else up. You're not going to get it from me, and I do sincerely apologize, because I love how this chapter is written, and I wanted to be able to translate it into English. But it's just way too dissimilar. I don't want to gamble. I don't want to assume that it's kind of similar enough, so that's what it must be in the first book as well. No, it's not. I don't know. I have no way to prove it. So just for my peace of mind, I have to just announce it that sorry, I didn't take care of all the translation stuff. Not just in terms of audio, but even just in terms of visuals. Flashing it, I cannot even do that much. Sincere apologies. It's a bummer too. I wanted this to go off without a hitch, but I don't speak Old Greek, Old Latin, and all that other stuff. I just don't know it. And I ain't gonna learn it, that's for sure. I guess there is something of an irony. I'm talking about not wanting to be a Pavlov's dog in reference to the forces of nature and me having recognition that I can be one way or another. Not absolutely, but certainly in terms of my mindset. I don't have to grovel to forces of nature. This is why I keep talking about, natural law drones. But it is a bit of an irony because it was Diogenes the dog in his tub. And sometimes the cynics plainly speak of nature as something that we ought to get more accustomed to in place of society. But I have this long track record of, God, listen to me, sometimes the cynics, I want to do cover for them. I shouldn't want to do cover for them. The cynics nearly always portray the natural state as necessarily superior. It's one thing to strive for independence, but I don't know why we would view independence in the natural state, especially when we say things like, oh, and all laws are not to be revered. I think there's some laws that we should stop shy of revering, but have very pro attitude towards. Because we're not barbarians. I think cynicism may dip us slightly in the direction of barbarity. So that's the big critical point. No appreciation for any custom should be our attitude. No, that's got nowhere to go but barbarity. And so I should say at least one ultra-critical thing about the cynics, and that is that it wasn't just these cultural memes that they disrespected and chose to not have any reverence for. It was also all laws. And it's like, yeah, you can't climb onto my mission statement, which is this: let's not be nature's Pavlov's dogs. It kind of ties itself together. Diogenes the dog in his tub. So I think, basically it's rain audio, it's raining heavily, so I'm doing damage to my phone, but I gotta do this now, because I always have to do this now, apparently. So I think that if you're a pessimist, if you're a pessimistic person, as that paper says, it's not just a pessimist, you gotta be the sort of pessimistic person for it to be meta-theoretically interesting. You got to take a stance. You got to be invested in whatever is the bad, and you got to admit that the bad prevails over the good. Two main quotas for pessimism that's got to be fulfilled with a strong enough certitude. Bad prevails over good. But in terms of being a pessimist, you really should choose what is your practical living philosophy. And so many pessimists online choose this line of activism, this line of armchair martyrs. Whereas if we're going to be armchair anything, we should be armchair iconoclasts, not martyrs. But people have that spread the ideological seed mentality. It's every bit as heinous as spread the literal seed to me the older I get. Spread the ideological seed. Sacrifice depth and originality and novelty to fulfill the objective, the prime directive. Whatever, to convince people not to procreate, to convince people to intervene in wildlife to end or reduce their suffering, something like that. Like they go into these modes where they feel themselves having to be persuasive in those regards, and so they don't go into the depth of the matter. If you go into the depth of the matter, you'll see that any such goal is just going to drag you down as a insight dispenser. And so what is your practical philosophy? It can't be that activist fuel one. What is the practical philosophy? You're going to have to land on, if you're a pessimist, really, you're going to have to land on either cynicism or asceticism. For cynicism, the rewards are claimed to be within this life. For the ascetics, in the other world, whatever that might be. But that, as a pessimist, should be, one of those two things should be your practical philosophy. If, for no other reason, to strive to one of these two, which they all have their variants as well, in many ways, especially asceticism. God, there's so many ascetics, and I'm so minimally informed on these works of asceticism. All the bookshop quotes, I've never read any of these works. This is on my reading list. The sublime path where they enter into the transcendent, the kind of things that I claw my way into after I get high. But the ascetics do it in these other ways, as the meditators do. But they also forego They pretty much surrender to absolute privation. I wonder what the famine rates are among ascetics as compared to the rest of the population, or other kinds of sickliness. Just how sickly are ascetics compared to the presumably much healthier, wider population. And then the cynics, I'm going to do the readout thing in full, so you'll know what I'm going to say about cynics in that chapter, because, yeah, Schopenhauer has a chapter on that, talking about how the Stoics reversed the matter. They perfected the theory at the expense of the practice. So in terms of the practice, it should be one of those two. And this is where you get the fun riddle. Then if we just stipulate that every single person who is born will live a sufficiently good, from a standpoint of asceticism or cynicism, one of their variants, there are many variants, does that mean that that person was then justly inserted into existence? And this is where I would break from all these traditions, why I don't consider myself philosophically a cynic and why I don't consider myself philosophically an ascetic. I'd like to strive to live a more ascetic life, like be able to last in a hair shirt for maybe a month straight. But in terms of the theoretical insights, no, I would disagree with them. Because even if you stipulate to me that all people who enter existence from here on out will live the ascetic or the cynic life, and thus the good life, I'm still going to say that's too much hedonic weighing down. There's too much hedonic weighing down associated in that. And from that standpoint, from any kind of minimally pluralistic standpoint, it's still not justified to bring people into existence, even if you're guaranteeing all of them will be cynics and ascetics. So these aren't, they're the better life, don't get me wrong. When I say the good life, I always mean these are the examples of the better lives, but nonetheless, those high virtues come at such high and exceedingly high hedonic costs. I'm going to say no, you still have no business putting people into existence, even if all of them are going to be ascetics or cynics. My phone is drenched. God. I joyfully report that my phone has been dried and it is 100% unharmed. For those of you sitting on the edge of your seat, my phone is fine. Obviously would have to be if you're hearing this to begin with. So I thought about what I said. I listened to the audios. Sorry about the wind, but you can hear me. Don't pretend you can't hear me. But I thought about what this means in terms of, like, can we be these eliminative pluralists and through eliminative pluralism truly punctuate why it's at best morally dubious to bring people into existence in all cases. Like in all cases, to one or another degree, it'll be morally dubious. And from a standpoint of like kind of a eliminative pluralism, the only way to attain to certain types of good lives is by particular surrendering of something that is necessary for other types of views of what makes a good life. You cannot clinch, you cannot satisfy enough of the variability within what it means to live the good life. You always have to be doing a cause-benefit between intrinsic goods and surrendering them such that you can meet the criteria of some other theory. No one has lived from A to Z what it takes to have a roundly good life. We might be able to put it this way. No one has lived a roundly good life. And see, what I'm doing now is I am willed into movement. I was standing under a cover and then, like, I guess as soon as I started recording the audio, I started walking. But it's still raining outside. But see, it wasn't my mind, because my mind had me say, go underneath the cover, then record the audio update. No, it was my will. And I'm still walking, and I'm still getting new rain on my phone. So I'm gonna just head back to the cover now. But see, I'm concentrating, I'm using my mind to articulate, and nonetheless, my will just takes over my body, and I step right back in the rain. This is just... God, if everyone were as self-vigilant, you'd see how often you're owned by your will. And see, I'm starting to walk again. How often you're owned by your will without intending to. I thought I was just exclusively in my own mind. But no, I wasn't. I was talking about what I kind of pretentiously titled, now that I'm a little down to earth, what I pretentiously chose to title Eliminative Pluralism, but I think it packs a lot of punch. You cannot live a roundly good life. I started talking about that, and I started walking, stepping right into the rain, which I just keep doing. My will continuously owes me as I'm trying to maintain a concentration and make all this coherent and intelligible. And here I start moving my feet again. Jesus, I can't stand still and record audios, not because my mind's bad, but because my will sucks and because it owns me. And everyone needs to be this self-vigilant. And then we'll all realize that there's no such thing as the sufficiently good life. The will just pounds you. You can gain all the wisdom in the world, your will's gonna pound you. And then morons like Jordan Peterson are gonna be out there highly popular precisely because they're pimps for the will, and the will pounds you. Some of this objective advice I'm giving, call it prudential advice, call it whatever you want. Some of this that I'm giving is at odds with saying follow your individuality, whatever, integrity. I'll make the formulation up later, but I say often follow your individuality. And some of the advice, I guess, quote unquote advice that I'm about to launch into eventually within the intro or outro, whatever I decide to make this. I should have made it the intro, but I think I'm leaning toward outro now. But this is that August 24th stuff. It's advice that is at odds. I'm saying craft yourself to be the kind of person who misses as few things as humanly possible. Take the word bare minimum seriously and literally. That's essentially what I'm saying. And in doing so, craft yourself to be the kind of person who misses as little as humanly possible once it's out of your life, as it will inevitably be. Schwab nailed it on the head when he said the will doesn't allow itself to be played with. There's no middle path between renouncing and desiring. That's what the Stoics try to tap dance around with their sophisticated arguments that, yeah, we can enjoy all these luxuries and then claim that once they're gone, we won't miss them, but we'll never put ourselves to the test. The cynics put themselves to the test. And so I'm so inspired by this stuff, and I'm turning it into life advice, I guess you can say. I'm turning it into non-ironic advice. I'm saying craft yourself to be the type of person who could put up with what the cynics put up with. Walking in the snow, as Diogenes did, barefooted, rolling in the hot summer sand, peak temperature hour of the day, UV rays and all, no sunscreen for that motherfucker. Craft yourself to be the kind of person who'll miss so little in life such that you could bear it, and do it by getting a jump start on it, by renouncing all possessions. But see, the Stoics, man, they wanted to make you believe that there is this clean sweet spot between renouncing and desiring. Just as there is not with knowing and willing, so too with desiring and renouncing. They were wrong. Shaw proved it in the chapter. I'm bringing it up now to say that some of the advice that I'm giving will absolutely be at odds with people's individuality, at least a minority of people, let's say. So to the extent that I say this advice applies even to those who would be hedonically weighed down by it across the course of their life, to the extent that I'm saying it applies to them too, yes, this is one of those cases where I have to go from perfect individuality in terms of the aspirational stuff into imperfect individuality and kind of make some room for this, irrespective of whether it fits you well, simply because I believe it's noble and the opposite of it is ignoble. You know what? Those of you who have stuck around for this long don't deserve me walking outside stoned as the closer for the video. And you certainly don't deserve the wind that followed. So I'm going to cut that out. And I believe I'm going to end it where I say, well, even if some things, skirt individuality, nonetheless, they should be recommended because they're noble. I'm going to cut it off there. And instead of my trippy explanation, let's do a readout. This is from Schopenhauer's Psychological Observations. This is not World is Will and Representation. This is one of his standalone essays. Psychological Observations. I'm going to read a few chunks from this, but mostly in the same slot. I'm just going to skip a bit because this really hammers the point really well. So he goes. This is Psychological Observations. Will, as the thing in itself, is the foundation of all being. It is part and parcel of every creature and the permanent element in everything. Oh, and by the way, this also does tie into the Stoicism theme as well. That's why I'm doing it, obviously. You'll see Stoicism in this. Will, then, is that which we possess in common with all men, nay, with all animals, and even with lower forms of existence, and insofar as we are akin to everything, so far, that is, as everything is filled to overflowing with will. On the other hand, that which places one being over another and sets differences between man and man is intellect and knowledge. Therefore, in every manifestation of self, we should, as far as possible, give play to the intellect alone. For, as we have seen, the will is the common part of us. Every violent exhibition of will is common and vulgar. In other words, it reduces us to the level of the species and makes us a mere type and example of it. In that it is just the character of the species that we are showing. So every fit of anger is something common, every unrestrained display of joy or of hate or fear. In short, every form of emotion, in other words, every movement of the will, if it's so strong as decidedly to outweigh the intellectual element in consciousness and to make the man appear as a being that wills rather than knows. In giving way to emotion of this violent kind, the greatest genius puts himself on a level with the commonest son of earth. Contrarily, if a man desires to be absolutely uncommon, in other words, great, he should never allow his consciousness to be taken possession of and dominated by the movement of his will, however much he may be solicited thereto. For example, he must be able to observe that other people are badly disposed towards him without feeling any hatred towards them himself. Nay, there is no surer sign of a great mind than that it refuses to notice annoying and insulting expressions, but straightway ascribes them, as it ascribes countless other mistakes, to the defective knowledge of the speaker, and so merely observes without feeling them. This is the meaning of that remark of Gratian, that nothing is more unworthy of a man than to let it be seen that he is one. And even in the drama, which is the peculiar province of the passions and emotions, it is easy for them to appear common and vulgar. And this is especially observable in the works of the French tragic writers, who set no other aim before themselves but the delineation of the passions. And by indulging at one moment in a vaporous kind of pathos, which makes them ridiculous, at another in epigrammatic witticisms, endeavor to conceal the vulgarity of their subject. I'm going to skip ahead a bit now because he gets a little, this nation's this way, that nation's that way, and I kind of don't care for that. The noble, in other words, the uncommon element in the drama, nay, what is sublime in it, is not reached until the intellect is set to work, as opposed to the will, until it takes a free flight over all those passionate movements of the will and makes them subject of its contemplation. Shakespeare in particular shows that this is his general method, more especially in Hamlet, and only when intellect rises to the point where the vanity of all effort is manifest and the will proceeds to an act of self-annulment is the drama tragic in the true sense of the word. It is then that it reaches its highest aim in becoming really sublime. And I want to skip and do one more thing. It's still within psychological observations, and I think it's a good... And so this final paragraph, which is a long one, but it's probably the highlight of this whole essay, psychological observations. And to bring it back to the beginning of the video, there being an affinity between anti-natalism and Stoicism. I think this paragraph, maybe I should have just read this one out, because this one nails it in a nutshell. I can't see things the way I saw them even 6 months ago, even as recently as 6 months ago. I can't see, I said, I agree with Schopenhauer's remark that the Stoics are mere braggarts and all this kind of stuff, but at the same time I said Stoicism has a lot going for it, and that's really because it's not just that people display all these, fears and worries and all this stuff when it comes to matters in their own personal lives. Like that to me is, halfway excusable. But it's when they're doing public commentary. It's just so riddled with fear. I mean, just open up any headline you want to open up. It's these people telling you there's 1,000,001 things to worry about. And I'm going to tell you why it makes sense to worry about them. And you're a better civic agent if you worry about them out loud the way I'm worrying about them. That's essentially what public discourse is. Just people saying worry, worry, worry. And it's so goddamn ignoble. And I didn't even view it this way, even as recently as 6 months ago. And this, what I'm about to read out here to close the video, is the perfect... It just distills it so well. And it does speak to the affinity, the pipeline between, as I view it, between anti-natalism and Stoicism. So he writes, according as a man's mental energy is exerted or relaxed, will life appear to him either so short and petty and fleeting that nothing can possibly happen over which it is worth his while to spend emotion. that nothing really matters, whether it is pleasure or riches or even fame, and that in whatever way a man may have failed, he cannot have lost much. Or, on the other hand, life will seem so long, so important, so all in all, so momentous, and so full of difficulty, that we have to plunge into it with our whole soul if we are to obtain a share of its goods, make sure of its prizes, and carry out our plans. This latter is the imminent and common view of life. It is what Gratian means when he speaks of the serious way of looking at things. Tomar mai de veras el vivir. Foreign. The former is the transcendental view, which is well expressed in Ovid's non est tanti. It is not worth so much trouble. Still better, however, by Plato's remark that nothing in human affairs is worth any great anxiety. This condition of mind is due to the intellect having got the upper hand in the domain of consciousness, where, freed from the mere service of the will, it looks upon the phenomena of life objectively, and so cannot fail to gain a clear insight into its vain and futile character. But in the other condition of mind, will predominates, and the intellect exists only to light it on its way to the attainment of its desires. A man is great or small according as he leans to one or the other of these views of life.